All right. Hey, y'all out there. What's happening? Welcome to the Switch for Good podcast. I'm Dotsie Bausch, and I'm here in studio with Alexandra Paul. We're being very safe.
Yes,
We're being very careful.
I have my mask.
Yes.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yes. Well, recently, this really incredible Time magazine special edition came out, 100 disease-fighting foods, and the whole magazine is focused on these 100 foods. So those of you that are watching on YouTube, here it is. You can go get it because it's on shelves now. I actually got it in Louisville, Kentucky when I was visiting my family just a couple of weeks ago. And what I do love about it is 97 or 96 of the foods are plants out of the 100. So we're getting somewhere.
That doesn't surprise us, but I'm glad Time's got the message. Because
Exactly.
they're the ones that put
Right.
butter is back on their cover one time.
Amen to that. So many different types of plants, from herbs and spices to vegetables, fennel and eggplant and garlic and flaxseed and grapefruit and ginger. I mean, just really extraordinary foods. And basically it takes us through why it is specifically a disease fighter and then, of course, how to enjoy it. So on page 35, there's a special area for you, Alexandra, and that is dark chocolate.
Yay. But it's probably unsweetened dark chocolate.
Well, nonetheless, let's just not dive in too deep. It's a disease fighter, so you're doing good.
Good to know.
While I didn't see wine in here.
Oh, I'm so sorry,
you're kind of the winner. So
you
as
can
far as our
share,
vices.
You can share my dark chocolate.
So the really cool thing about this is our guest today, Cynthia Sass, is quoted multiple times throughout this in terms of disease fighter, and she specifically weighed in on dark chocolate.
Oh, what did she say?
So she said, here it is. Here's why it's a disease fighter. Flavonoids, dark chocolate's key ingredient, are antioxidants found in many fruits and vegetables. Flavonoids have been shown to exhibit anti-inflammatory, and I'm going to butcher this, anthropogenic. We'll get her to tell that what that word means. Anti-diabetic, anti-cancer, and neuroprotective activities, says Cynthia Sass.
It must be super healthy. The question, I will have to ask her how much sugar I can add, because when I was a kid, my mom restricted sugars a lot, which is probably why I really like sugar now. I shouldn't blame her on that. But anyway.
It's mom's fault. Always mom's fault.
And I took some baking chocolate that I found, and I took this big bite of it, and it had not an ounce of sweetness to it. It was the worst, most bitter thing I ever, and it scarred me almost for life, but didn't get me off dark chocolate for life. So anyway, we'll have to ask her how much sugar I can eat in my chocolate.
Right.
Milk chocolate negates the
completely
good parts of dark chocolate.
Right. So. Okay. Well, we'll find out. We'll find out what that word means that I can't pronounce, and find out if you still have all of these properties, even if there's a little sugar in there, dark chocolate. Okay.
But it's so cool.
We'll get to the skinny.
Such a mainstream magazine has, basically is saying that 97% of these amazing foods are plant-based. So,
yeah.
Yay. They have some weird animal-based foods in here that they say are good, like oysters, right?
I think it was oysters, and it was salmon, and it was maybe Parmesan, and I can't remember if there was a fourth one, but those were the three. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So let's talk about Cynthia Sass. Let's give her an intro here, because she's done it all. I mean, she's held jobs that we didn't even know existed. She's a registered dietitian. She has a lot of letters after her name. Actually, I had to look them up. She's a registered dietitian. She's a board certified specialist in sports dietetics. And through that, she's worked with a bunch of professional sports teams across the country. And she's a writer and editor for a lot of magazines like Shape and Fitness. She's been on ABC, a lot of the morning shows, news channels. She really knows her nutrition. And I know, Dotsie, you are a fangirl.
Right.
So you'll have to tell us the story of how you and Cynthia met. But Cynthia, welcome to the Switch for Good podcast. We're so happy to have you on.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Well, we're going to ask a lot of our nutrition questions that we have, and that we think our listeners have too. You're also an author of several books, and you have one that's has just come out. We're going to talk about. It's called Slim Down Now, Shed Pounds and Inches with Pulses, which are the new superfood. So they're probably in that Time magazine article.
Oh, yes, there were.
And
especially
pulses,
my favorite lentils.
Pulses are beans. Is that correct?
Pulses is the umbrella term for beans, lentils, peas, and chickpeas. So that whole family of superfoods that are really kind of those under the radar stealth superfoods that everyone probably has in their cupboard, but no one knows how amazing they are for you.
It's funny. Okay. I thought chickpeas were a bean, but I put them all in one. I lumped them all. Thank you for that. I just learned something.
We're here to learn.
Seconds.
Yeah. Okay. Before I'd love to go into those to start off with. We have so much to cover, but do help me with the anthropogenic word that I can't pronounce because it's bugging me.
To anti-blood clotting.
Okay. Okay, there you go.
Great.
Keep eating. And is it cool if she has a little sugar in the dark chocolate?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. Okay. So actually, most of the research that's been done on dark chocolate, of which there's quite a bit of published studies, has been done with 70% dark. So 70% dark is generally vegan, no dairy added, no dairy solids or anything like that. So it's completely vegan, but it does have some sugar in it. So the good news is all those benefits that you mentioned all come from at least 70%. You can go higher if you want to, but 70% is enough to get those benefits and still get your little bit of sweet fix. Yeah. And actually, when it comes to sugar, right now, the strictest guidelines on sugar come from the American Heart Association because of the association between excess sugar and heart disease, which is still our number one killer of both men and women in the United States. And what they say is that women should have no more than 6 teaspoons worth of added sugar a day, and men no more than 9 teaspoons. So if you're having a couple squares of dark chocolate, that may be 2 teaspoons. It's well within the recommended limits per day that will keep you at low risk for cardiovascular problems. So you can definitely have your sweetened dark chocolate.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
I'm so happy.
In the 100 was coffee too. So I was happy about that. Didn't get my wine there, but okay. I was happy to see coffee and be included.
Tell me about the link between sugar and cardiovascular issues. What's the problem?
Well, there are several problems. One is inflammation. So we know that excess sugar is, inflammatory, and pretty much all the chronic diseases, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, neurological diseases, cancers are tied to excess inflammation. So when you have that unchecked inflammation, it's really a risk factor for premature aging and increasing the maybe early onset of chronic disease or the disease itself. So that is one big factor. It does affect our circulatory system as well. So when we have more stress on the body in terms of how the heart has to pump harder to push, fluids through our body, or the pressure on the arteries themselves, it's going to increase that damage. And that damage can lead to stiffening, hardening, blockages, which can lead to heart attack or stroke even.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah. So how did you get started in all of this? I mean, like Alexandra said, there's many letters after your name. And so you just kept diving, right? You just more and more and learn more and be more of an expert. But was there something, I know you were vegetarian since you were pretty young.
I feel really lucky because I found out about becoming a dietitian in high school. And I knew then going to college that that's what I wanted to do. And I've met so many people, colleagues through the years, who didn't even know that this was a field that you could go into as a profession, and so had to go back to school again as a second career. So very early on, I wanted to do this. And I think there were a few influences that were more serious. My mom struggled with dieting and weight most of my childhood. So I would see her go on and off kind of crazy diets and her weight go up and down. And then my father, who was very picky, would eat very few foods, didn't want to eat very many vegetables, but he never really had a weight issue. But when I was in high school, his brother, who he was very close to, got diagnosed with colon cancer and died very shortly. I mean, I would say probably 6 weeks after diagnosis, because he had symptoms, didn't go to the doctor, didn't get checked. So my father he just dove into nutrition and fitness. He started eating broccoli and, wheat germ and all these things that I was like, you could prevent a disease that runs in your family by how you eat. I was fascinated by that idea. So when I was in high school, I had an amazing health teacher. Health was my favorite class. I knew I was going to do something health related. And she said, well, why don't you sit down with this book? It was like a book of health professions, kind of an A through Z book. And when I saw a dietitian, and I was like, food, nutrition, disease prevention, disease management. That was it. So I was obsessed. When I was in high school, I have an older sister who's 8 years older than me, and she would get a lot of women's magazines, sent to the house, and I would rip out all the nutrition articles and save them in a file. And I would, try to cook for my brother when he would come home from college. And, I was obsessed with it. And it's been my passion ever since. I can't imagine doing anything else for a living.
Do you subscribe to the idea that it's not always or necessarily bad genetics, but just bad diets of our parents, grandparents, their grandparents?
Yeah. So what they believe as of now, because this is an evolving field, I think, nutrigenomics, the connection between nutrition and our genetics is a really emerging area of science, and will probably be driven a lot more by genetics in the future in terms of prescribing specific diets based on our genes. But what we know right now is that about 80% of the risk of any disease is lifestyle. So of course, how we eat, our stress, how we sleep, our social support systems, and nutrition playing a huge, huge role. So if you have a genetic predisposition towards some sort of disease, your chance of getting that disease skyrockets if you have a poor diet, poor lifestyle. However, you can also get a disease having no genetic predisposition to it because of a poor lifestyle. So people who have a low, no genetic predisposition and a healthy lifestyle are probably, the best candidates for having a long, healthy life. But lifestyle is the majority of it. So if you have a genetic, if people have done 23andMe or some of these other tests, and you are told you have a higher risk of certain illnesses, your lifestyle can largely be preventative in terms of not allowing that gene to be expressed and that illness to come about. However, it does vary depending on the disease state. We know, for example, if you have a genetic predisposition towards certain things, your risk is much higher in general, let's say breast cancer, compared to, say, colon cancer. So it's a really important interaction. It's not, if you have a, like, for example, with my dad, colon cancer did run in his family. So his brother wasn't the only family member who died of that. So he became very vigilant, like, okay, I'm going to do everything I can to prevent this from happening to me. And knock on wood, he's in his 80s and he's doing really well. He's healthy. He's never had, any diagnosis. So, I think we're coming around to, you pointed out the Time Magazine issue. We're coming around to the fact that nutrition is really the foundation of wellness. And it can't be an afterthought. When I first started out in this field, people would generally come to a dietitian after they had been diagnosed with diabetes or high cholesterol or high blood pressure. Now, the majority of my clients are coming to me for fitness, wellness, prevention, even those who are not professional athletes or competitive athletes, but they're just active people. They want to learn. They want to learn about how to prevent some of these illnesses that they've seen in their parents or grandparents or other family members. And that's really critical, right? Unfortunately, it's not covered by insurance. So our healthcare system is a little bit turned around in terms of investing the money in this preventative care. And of course, nutrition all around in terms of access to healthy food and making it more affordable and available to everybody.
I remember learning from Dr. Dean Ornish, when we were making the Game Changers, that our genetics are certainly part of our history, but they don't have to direct our future.
Yeah, that's a great phrase.
What is your food philosophy overall when a client comes to you? Where do you want to take them?
So as a dietitian, one of the things that we're trained to do is to know what's ideal and optimal, but to also meet the client where they're at and help move them in that direction. So I also have to take into account their the differences, let's say, in their family upbringing, culture, relationships, occupations, and things like that. So my personal philosophy is 100% plant-based, whole foods. So a whole food plant-based diet is my personal philosophy. Most people who know that and come to me want to move all the way to that or very, very close to that. So I may meet someone who is, I've had professional athlete clients who have pretty much a junk food standard American diet where it's a lot of processed foods, it's a lot of artificial additives, very few vegetables and fruits and plants. And, so moving them from that to a whole food plant-based diet is, it can be a step-by-step process. Some people are good with a 180 overnight switch, and other people really need to ease into it step by step. And then I do have some clients who they don't necessarily want to be 100% plant-based, but they want to be 95% plant-based. So I wouldn't say that I won't work with someone if they don't want to be 100% plant-based, although I do really believe that 100% plant-based whole food diet is the ultimate in terms of, wellness and disease prevention.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a feeling about low fat versus high? What's your feeling about fat? We have different. we've heard a lot of differing thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I don't personally believe in low fat. I think that moderate fat, meaning somewhere between, let's say, 30 to 40% of your total calories coming from fat, is optimal, as long as it's mostly from monounsaturated fats. So your Mediterranean style fats, the high omega-9 fats, and that would be your avocado and avocado oil and olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, that is, and most nuts. And then some of the other polyunsaturated fats like seeds, tahini, things like that. The reason that I believe that, there's a few reasons. When you look at the blue zones, so the 5 areas in the world where people live the longest, healthiest lives. So they live to be very old, but they have very low rates of chronic disease and they have low rates of obesity. And when you look at, even though they're 5 very different regions of the world, they have a similar eating pattern. And that eating pattern does include natural fats. But also when people go too low in their fat, in terms of a percentage of their total calories, there's only carbohydrates and protein. So one has to go up if the other goes down, right? Or so when someone goes very low in fat, typically the carbohydrate goes very high. And what I've seen with people individually is that can lead to issues with triglycerides. It can lead to issues. It really depends on the quality of the carbohydrates, but it also depends on how active the person is. Mm-hmm. Someone who's very physically active can afford a higher percentage of their calories from carbs. Someone who sits at a desk all day and maybe does 45 to 50 minutes of physical activity 3 to 5 days a week generally cannot afford that. So if you're filling that space with healthful fats like avocado or almonds and walnuts and things like that, you're going to get a better balance. The other thing is fats are really actually very good for circulation and digestion. So when you look at, say, if you think, one analogy I like to use is if you think of a straw and you think of pouring olive oil through a straw, it kind of, will flow through very nicely. If you think about putting, bacon grease or butter through a straw, they have a very different effect, right? So in our arteries, in our body, these types of fats that come in along, sort of bundled with antioxidants and bioactive compounds that open up blood vessels, that improve circulation and blood flow to the brain and to the organs and to muscles, are really incredibly protective. So when they've looked at some studies where they would pair, say, a food that's known to be pro-inflammatory and bad for circulation, meaning it will impede circulation in the immediate hours after a meal, and they pair it with one of these healthful fats, it very much counters that impact. So fats also are good for, they're kind of carriers where they help you absorb fat-soluble vitamins and certain antioxidants that need to latch onto that fat in order to be transported from the gut into the bloodstream where they can really go to work. So I'm really all for fat. A higher fat diet's also really good for our skin and hair. It just has to be the right type, right? Like I'm not a fan of the keto diet. I think that takes fat way too far. That's 75 to 90% fat. And it's also very difficult to get enough fiber and enough plant foods on that type of a diet. I've seen people over and over again in the, blood work that I have done with some of my clients, that their LDL, the bad cholesterol, just goes way high when they're on such a high fat diet. And then their digestive health suffers because they're not getting enough plants and enough prebiotics that feed the good bacteria in our gut that are responsible for not only good digestion, but anti-inflammation and even mental health. We know that our gut bacteria interact with our brain and nervous system. So it can affect our mood in terms of calmness, happiness, even sleep quality and things like that. So I think just balance is the key overall. And so many people are out of balance one way or another.
Well, let's talk about beans and pulses, because we're going to talk about fiber, and that's what you're alluding to. Why are they magical in the human body?
Okay, so I actually, this book that you referred to, it actually came out 5 years ago. It's my newest book, but it's not new. But I'm really proud of it because of this reason. So I actually wrote the book. I got the contract to write the book back in 2013. Okay. So I wrote the book at the end of 2013. I turned it in January 2nd or something, 2014. And it came out a year later in 2015. Wow. So that long ago, I had a feeling that pulses, again, this umbrella term for beans, lentils, peas, and chickpeas, these are all plants that are in the legume family, but pulses do not include soy or peanuts. They exclude those two parts of the legume family. So it's just any type of beans, any type of lentils, any type of peas, including chickpeas or black-eyed peas. That family, I saw that family was going to become really important for a number of reasons. Number one, they are very eco-friendly. So pulses enrich the soil in which they're grown. So they really help in terms of being able to support sustainable agriculture. They are very eco-friendly in that they use very little water compared to other crops. They use little natural resources to grow and flourish. They also are naturally gluten-free and gluten intolerance, gluten sensitivity, celiac was becoming more of an issue. They're plant-based, obviously, so that was becoming more important. A lot more people, even back in 2013, were moving towards a plant-based diet. They're very affordable, so you can go and buy a bag of lentils for like $1.29, or a can of chickpeas for $1 or sometimes less. They're also very versatile. I use pulses. I just posted on my Instagram a few days ago a black bean pudding that I make, which was actually a variation of a recipe in that book, because I have 3 pulse puddings in the book, and this was a dark chocolate pudding with black beans in it. It's like a chia pudding with black beans. So you can put them in sweet dishes and desserts, and you can, obviously black bean brownies have been a thing for a while. You can put them in smoothies, but you can also, of course, put them in savory dishes, and pulses are consumed in almost every country around the globe. Yeah. So they checked all these boxes, right? They're also not a common trigger of allergies and intolerances, so they're very kind of non-allergenic. They're just the perfect food. So I wanted this book to be focused around pulses. And the premise of the book is that you eat at least 1 serving of pulses a day.
Which is how much is a serving? Is it a cup or half a cup?
It's a half a cup. Of course, you can certainly eat more than that. I do. I eat a lot more than that on a daily basis of pulses. They're my favorite food. I actually have a whole chapter in the book about gas and bloating, because people are really concerned about eating more pulses and how it's going to be, I'm going to be gassy and bloated all the time. And what's interesting is that the research shows, I believe it was Arizona State that did this study, where they had one group of people add a half a cup of beans a day and another group added a half a cup of cooked carrots. So the cooked carrots are kind of the control food that they generally don't cause any gas or bloating. The people who added the beans did have a little bit increase in gas and bloating in the first week, but it was far less than they expected. I believe it was something like 60% had it, or 60% didn't have it, and something like 40% did. So it was far less than they anticipated. But then every week that they kept eating them, it went down, 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 down to the point where it ended up matching the carrots, the control food. So your body adjusts. So in the beginning, yes, you might be a little bit more gassy, bloated. You might want to time, when you eat your pulses in terms of when it's going to be fine for that to happen. But your body adjusts to the point where I have lots of clients, and also myself, I can eat, 2 or 3 cups a day of pulses and not experience that sort of side effect, so to speak. But
and also,
the idea
if you soak them, doesn't that help too? If you soak them first?
It does help. Mm-hmm. It does help. But most people will buy canned. And also now you can buy frozen. In fact, when I wrote the book, a lot of the pulse options didn't even exist. Pulse pastas weren't available in 2013. So when I was writing the book, I think the only, aside from canned or dried, the only other options really were like a pea protein powder or something like that. Now there's chickpea protein powder. There's lots of, fava bean flour. There's lots of different flours. But now, of course, all these pulse products like pea protein burgers even weren't around in 2013. So just in the time, this is one of the reasons I'm proud of the book, is because they really have exploded in popularity. But the problem that I had was the book was just a little bit ahead of its time, because when it came out, I really wanted the word pulse to be in the title. my publisher didn't want that because they said, no one knows what that means. Most people haven't heard of that term in relation to foods. They're going to think, take your pulse. They're not going to understand what this book is about. And having to educate someone about the title of a book is not a good way to promote a book. So I did, so it was called Slim Down Now, because it really, I have a whole chapter on the health benefits of pulses in terms of lowering the risk of type 2 diabetes, cancer, heart disease, all these chronic diseases, but also in improving gut health, as we mentioned, but also in weight loss. So what has been shown in the research is that simply adding pulses to your diet can lead to weight loss without doing anything else, meaning you don't have to count calories, you don't have to take anything else away, just by adding them. And that's probably a triple effect. Number one, they're very satiating. So they tend to lead to eating less later in the day. So you kind of naturally curb your consumption. The other thing is that fiber and the anti-inflammatory effect, because they're so high in antioxidants and anti-inflammatories, that probably has an impact on our metabolisms in ways that help with weight management. So because weight management, I believe, I don't know, what's the latest statistic, 66% or something like that is overweight or obese in the United States. So it was a kind of a weight loss focused book, but the idea was incorporating these pulses every day. And the other premise of the book was sort of building your meals like you build your outfits. So I talk about like using this, like, when you get dressed in the morning, you have to have a top, bottom, and shoes. You could get away without wearing socks or stockings, but you have to have these 3 core pieces to an outfit. You wouldn't wear 2 pairs of jeans and no shirt and go out, to the grocery store. You can't wear 2 pairs of shoes at the same time. So in the same way, there was kind of a foundation of the meal. The top part was non-starchy vegetables, because we need people to be eating many more vegetables, right? The statistic is only 1 in 10 people eat the recommended minimum servings of produce a day. 1 in 10, 90% are falling short of that. So I wanted vegetables to be part of every.
How many cups is that, by the way? Sorry to interrupt, but I always see these things where it says 1 serving of vegetables, and I don't know what that means. So can you give us a?
Well, it does depend. It does vary depending on what reference you're looking at. I think a good general reference, though, is 1 cup from the raw state, meaning before cooking if it's cooked. So something like spinach is going to shrink way, way, way down. So a cup of cooked spinach is very different from a cup of raw spinach. But the general minimum recommended servings per day is 5. Okay, I like to go up to 7, because 7 has been the 7 cups from the raw state, again, of produce. I really like to emphasize 5 cups of vegetables and 2 cups of fruit. Has been researched a lot in terms of not only its ability to reduce health risks and improve overall health and support immune function, et cetera, but also support mental health. And that's such an important piece of the wellness puzzle, right? That people who eat 7 servings of produce a day are calmer, happier. They have more even creativity and productivity. They call it flourishing, that when you eat more produce, you actually flourish as a human being, which is beautiful, right? So we need to get more, that number way up from 10% where it is now. So the top part was the veggies. The pants part was the protein, and that could be pulses. Pulses could be your protein because they are pretty protein rich, especially something like lentils, 16 grams of protein per cup. So, half a cup is considered a serving, but if you were going to do, a full cup, that would give you 16 grams, which is, pretty darn good. And then the shoes part was the healthy fats that I mentioned, the Mediterranean style fats, the avocado, the extra virgin olive oil, et cetera, or a dairy-free pesto, maybe made with olive oil and nuts. And I love pesto. So, and then the accessory, like putting a jacket on over your shirt or having a messenger bag or a hat or a scarf, is the carbohydrate. So that could be a whole grain like quinoa or brown rice. It could be a starchy vegetable like potatoes or sweet potato, or a root vegetable. Again, it could be pulses because they provide both carbohydrates and protein. And then it could also be fresh fruit. So if you're and then the jewelry in the analogy is herbs and spices. So those have a lot of antioxidant potency. They have a lot of anti-inflammatory compounds. And of course, they add that flavor and aroma to our meal. So can you imagine if every person on the planet ate like this, where they're building their meals like this? Vegetables, healthy proteins, healthy fats, healthy carbohydrates, all whole food based, all naturally nutrient rich. How much more fiber and nutrients and health protective compounds we would be consuming on a daily basis. So that's the premise. And then I have about 115 recipes or something like that in the book. as well. But it can be adaptable for someone who wants to be 100% plant-based or someone who wants to be kind of semi-plant-based. Because I have found in my practice, especially in writing or speaking and talking with people, that some people need to ease into it, where if they start to eat plant-based, let's say Monday through Friday, or they eat plant-based at home, but not when they're away from home, or they eat plant-based, 2 meals a day and one they don't, they start to get that experience with, hey, you know what? I feel a lot better. And this is actually way easier than I thought. And it's also more affordable. I mean, there's so many, of course, benefits to it. So once they start to ease into it, many people have told me, that's one thing I do like about social media, is being able to connect with people that you would never have a chance to meet in real life. That people have reached out to me and said, when I started your book, I was still eating chicken or dairy, and now I'm 100% plant-based because you showed me how easy it was to build your meals this way. Mm-hmm. And so I love hearing that. To me, that's one of the most rewarding things I can hear, also because of the impact on the environment.
I love it's like a good food outfit that you're describing.
Yes.
Everything. Let's talk lectins in relation to pulses and beans. I had a friend where a long time ago, I was like 6 months vegan or something. And he's like, oh God, what do you eat? Then you're like, oh, all the other stuff that, is on the side of your plate. And I said, I've been eating a lot of beans, and it's like, oh my gosh, I feel so satiated. And he immediately said, oh, I don't eat beans. You shouldn't eat beans. They steal nutrients from your body. And I was like, oh, what? And I went down the rabbit hole to try to understand.
The paleo folks have made beans like, terrible.
Yeah. So we know about. So I did more research and understood maybe that they were talking about lectins, which are in raw beans but not in cooked beans, and nobody on the planet eats raw beans. They can be poisonous. I mean, nobody crunches on a raw bean. So what are lectins? Good, bad? Are they in cooked beans? Like, do we need to be thinking about them? Why are they so demonized?
Yeah, I actually it's confusing to me why they're so demonized, because it just doesn't make sense when you look at. I mentioned I have a whole chapter in that book about the health benefits in terms of chronic disease prevention, optimal, even athletic performance, right? And pulses. All of those published studies and the blue zones that we just talked about, these, areas of the world where people live to be 90, 100 years old with low rates of chronic disease, they eat a lot of beans and other pulses in those regions of the world. If we have all of that data showing a very strong association between beans and health prevention and longevity and optimal health, how can it also be true that lectins, from these foods, right, are so dangerous? It really doesn't make sense. But also, you just hit the nail on the head, Dotsie. They're in raw beans. When you soak and cook beans, they're largely removed. They're also largely removed in cooking. So even though they may be problematic in something like raw beans, which you said can be toxic, and no one's going to eat that. So I think what happened is that a theory sort of sprouted and grew and grew and grew and got exaggerated to the point where it just took over. Oh, all cooked foods or all foods that contain these in any amount are bad for you. I don't believe that at all. I think some people who have, let's say, a pre-existing inflammatory condition, or maybe have a gut health problem, may have a difficult time with some foods in this category, whether it's whole grains or beans or seeds. I don't think that that's directly due to the lectins, but that's a little bit more individualized. But for general wellness and for healthy populations, I don't think that lectins are something that you should be avoiding.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Clearing that one up.
You mentioned that you work with athletes and that sometimes they have a junk food diet. And I think a lot of listeners would be surprised that athletes, they think they eat really healthily because they're athletes. Yet you've counseled the Yankees, the Rangers, the Tampa Bay Rays, the Phillies, all these sports teams that are at the top of their game. You were even working with the Tampa Bay Rays and the Phillies when they both went to the World Series. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So
back in 2008.
So give us a little behind the scenes scoop about what these athletes eat and why they need help.
Yeah. Well, it's really changed a lot in my experience over the years that I've been doing this. So when I first started out, working with pro athletes. This was, probably maybe 2000, early 2000s was when I first started working with pro. At first, I think the first pro athlete I worked with was a pro tennis player. I've worked with a lot of pro athletes individually, one-on-one in my private practice as well. In terms of teams, okay. But early on, back in the, that around 2005 or so, it wasn't well accepted among a lot of athletes that nutrition was important for performance or injury risk or disease, recovery. It was really very fringe, so I would, it was like yoga or meditation. It was kind of like, I don't need that.
I do a lot of cardio. I'm fine. Right?
Yeah. I mean, because I would have athletes who would say, I'm performing at a pro level. I have a very low body fat percentage. I got here without worrying about this. Why do I need to worry about this? So I would have to sell them on it, and really say, every time you eat, you have an opportunity to reduce inflammation, to optimize the recovery or the kind of recover from the wear and tear that you put on your body with your training or performance. You have an opportunity to optimize your immune system. Or you can do the exact opposite. You can reduce your immune function. You could increase inflammation. You could increase your disease risk. You can lower your ability to recover, which also affects your performance the next day or the next time you perform. And it was difficult to kind of get them to wrap their heads around this sometimes. Nowadays, it's changed because in that time span, we've had, Men's Health Magazine, some of these other publications where younger male athletes have been exposed to nutrition from the get-go, right? Or now most universities and colleges have an athletic department that employs registered dietitians. So they've been exposed to this idea that it's an integral part of sports medicine and performance. But when I first started working with teams, I mean, there were, basically, it was just junk food, that was fed. It was really all about what they liked, what they wanted to eat versus what would help optimize their performance, either mentally, physically, or again, recovery. And then the other thing that really helped was that some high profile athletes would come out in the media and talk about that, the fact that changing their diet and eating healthfully helped them, like Dotsie, help them achieve this high level of success and also the longevity of their career, being able to perform at a high level much longer or later in life than they might otherwise have. Or I remember one team I worked with, a player came out in the media and said, if it wasn't for me focusing on nutrition, I don't know if I would have gotten through this season without being injured. That is that could be career ending for someone to get injured and be out for the rest of the season or be out forever.
That longevity in your sporting career is like you mentioned, really what we're seeing the trend go towards. When you're 17, and you're a talented athlete, I mean, yeah, you could probably eat coal and Coca-Cola and, you'd be fine for a little bit there. But I think so many athletes are starting to recognize there are some keys and some tickets to longevity. And in the big ball sports, they're making many millions of dollars a year. So that completely changed the trajectory of setting up the future for them and their families. I think the average amount of time in the NFL is 2.5 years. People don't know how short it is. So if these players can increase those years and then longevity, like I said, it can be a completely different setup for their future. For me, as standing on the Olympic podium just a few months shy of my 40th birthday, I did not get any richer because we don't make any money cycling. So it was a completely different reason that I went after it. But these big ball sports teams and players, they're starting to see, folks like Tom Brady, who is like, the dude is still playing at the highest level, right? And he's like the age of many of their fathers, the ones that are coming into the league.
Right. And my experience has been that whenever something like the Game Changers was huge, right? Because I was probably asked about that more than anything I've ever been asked about in my entire career. So that had a huge influence. But I would also get asked about Tom Brady or about other athletes that had come out and talked about this in the media by younger athletes and say, what do you think about this? Is there something to this? Does this really, does this really have an impact? So that athletes certainly have a lot of influence over each other. And there's been a lot of adoption of vegan and plant-based diets in, the NBA for sure, NFL, and even MLB.
You've written a lot of articles for many different magazines, and intermittent fasting is in the news a lot. Can you tell us what you think about that? thing that's confusing is that 5 years ago it was all about little meals constantly. That was supposed to be good for your blood sugar. That was supposed to be good for your body fat. Now they're saying that intermittent fasting is good for your blood sugar.
Which seems like the
and
opposite.
lowers your body fat. Yeah. So are they both right?
Yeah.
Or what's
It's a
going
tricky
on?
topic because the research is very all over. The research is a bit all over the place in terms of the type of intermittent fasting. So there's different ways to do it. There's the 16-8, which is 16 hours a day of fasting, an 8-hour window of eating. There's also the 5-2, which is 2 days a week. You fast, meaning, 500 to 600 calories a day on those days. And then the other 5 days you eat a normal diet. There's also sort of like a shorter 5-day fast where you fast for 5 days consecutively. And then you maybe only do that once a month or a couple times a year. So there's many different ways, there's many different methods. They're not standardized, right? So the studies are looking at all these different methods and different populations. So some of the research is done in obese people with metabolic syndrome, or some of it's done in only men and not women. I mean, so it's very hard to come up with a really strong conclusion. However, the animal research and some of the human studies do show some potential benefits to intermittent fasting, especially either the 16-8 or the sort of 5-day, consecutive. And what they show is that in the animal studies and in some of the human research, you see an improvement in, you mentioned blood sugar and insulin regulation. You see an improvement in immune function, including the increased production of stem cells. You see an improvement in this process where your body kind of cleans itself, so to speak, by going and taking cells that are either dysfunctional or, not working properly, and kind of killing those cells off so they maybe can reduce the risk of those cells becoming disease cells, which can lead to something like cancer. And we see some weight loss, and specifically belly fat loss, belly fat is the most dangerous area of the body to hold on to extra fat because of its association with things like heart disease and cognitive decline and strokes. So it's very intriguing. I think we need more studies. I think that if someone I'm asked a lot about intermittent fasting by athletes because I work with a lot of athletes. What I don't like to see is someone fasting during their hours of training. It can negatively impact your training performance. It can even lead to breaking down muscle tissue. It can also lead to potentially, having a low blood sugar episode to where you pass out. It can be really risky to apply this one principle to everybody across the board, regardless of, their situation. But I think we need to keep our eye on it because, like we mentioned earlier, 60-something% of our population is overweight and obese. And what they're finding is that if this is a habit that can potentially improve weight management and optimize health in some ways, and there's no negatives to it, it may be a useful tool. However, again, it has to be individualized. But what I don't like is there is a protocol out there. It's a 4-hour eating window. So fasting 20 hours a day and limiting yourself to only 4 hours of eating. I think that's too extreme. I also think it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get all of your nutrition into a 4-hour window. And it kind of overstresses your digestive system to try to have to break down all that. What we know about protein specifically is that having it in about 4 evenly distributed meals is the best way to optimize your utilization of that protein for the maintenance, healing, and repair of protein tissues in the body. So if you are an athlete or an active person and you are putting that wear and tear and you need that recovery nutrition, and you're consuming your, pea protein powder or whatever kind of plant protein, you want to have that, about 4 times a day. And if you're only eating 4 hours a day, there's no way you could possibly do that. So I'm not a fan. Plus, it just, from a social standpoint, we all have social lives and, relationships or families or other things that we need to do that play a role in how and when we eat. So for many people that I've encountered who try intermittent fasting and it ends up interfering with their social life, it can actually be really negative for their mental health. And it can lead to more disordered eating, which is, not good for wellness. So it's really interesting. I think we'll see a lot more research to come. There is an interesting book. It's called The Longevity Diet. And it's written by Walter Longo at USC, and he's one of the top longevity experts. I don't know if you've interviewed him, but he's from one of the blue zones actually, and he writes a lot about the blue zones in the book, which the blue zones are at least 95 to 100% plant-based. But he talks about how intermittent fasting, even a 12-hour eating window, is probably adequate to get some of those benefits that I mentioned. So if you're, let's say, eating 7:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m., that makes sense for a lot of people.
That's just don't night eat. They've always said that.
Because I like night eating. Yeah, I do. I have something like, not a lot, because I don't like to eat a lot, but I do eat, like, I'll have something I had an apple last night at 9:00.
Yeah, well, that'll kill you.
So
don't do that anymore.
But I don't eat a lot. But no, it's not a lot, but it's something, and is that bad?
Well, I would say bad. I think it's very circumstantial. So, kind of depends on what have you eaten earlier? Like, what time are you going to be going to bed? What are you doing between the time you eat the apple and the time you go to bed? So for example, a lot of clients I work with who have 9-to-5 jobs, maybe they don't eat breakfast. They really don't eat enough during the day when they're more active. And then they eat a really big meal at night and they go to bed a few hours after eating. That's kind of a recipe for disaster. But if you've kind of eaten balanced and healthfully and appropriately during the day, and then you have an apple and you have a couple hours between, eating that apple and being able to burn and use the carbohydrates that you just consumed from that apple before you go to sleep, that's not a problem really. But that fasting window of 12 hours, I think is basically considered to be the minimum of what would be required of no food or, water would be fine, but no caloric intake in that 12-hour window, say again, 7:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. to get some of those other benefits.
It does seem, as most things are, so specific to the person. I know when I was training in extreme measures and having to get in about 4,500, sometimes 5,000 calories a day, during those weeks, every single night in the middle of the night at 3, I woke up like clockwork and was starving. So I definitely had to move my window into night eating, and I still wouldn't be able to avoid that. And I would be up in the middle of the night. It was always bananas and peanut butter because it's what I could get the quickest. And I'm like in the kitchen, just pissed that I'm up and a gurgling, starving stomach kind of feeling is what would wake me up. And I never really was able to dial in or figure out how to make that not happen on those really, even if I ate at 8:30 or something and ate dinner, I couldn't seem to save that off. So it's so specific to everybody's unique individual lifestyle and their output.
Can you explain, though, why does blood sugar stay pretty steady if you eat the many meals throughout the day also? Is that also a healthy way to eat?
It can be. It really depends on if you are the studies on this are mixed, because what some show, and I've seen this anecdotally with some clients, is that the more frequently you eat, the more opportunity to overeat. So if you end up overeating just a little bit, but you do that 3 out of your 5 times that you eat in a day, you may overconsume to the point where then you really throw off blood sugar and insulin regulation. So it kind of depends on the sort of the balance of what you're consuming, and the quality, of course, is in terms of foundation, it's like quality, balance, timing, quantity, they all come together. So for example, if you had a processed, like a blueberry muffin that's made with white flour and refined sugar and, a scant bit of blueberries in there, you're going to have a very different effect on the body than if you had oatmeal with, blueberries and walnuts and cinnamon and a little tiny bit of maple syrup, right? So even though they could be the same number of calories and eaten at the same time, very, very different effect on the body.
I was going to go into diet trends, but I would love for you to talk about, that is such a great point, that it's not just calories in, calories out. There's a difference in the type of calories that you eat.
Absolutely. I have been saying that for a long time. I remember when I first said this, I got some backlash from some of my colleagues too, because it was like, well, are you saying that it doesn't matter? No, it's not that it doesn't matter, but we clearly know that quality is king, right? So if you had 100 calories worth of gummy bears, 100 calories worth of blueberries, very, very different, right? And no one can discount that. I mean, it's nutrition is far, far, far beyond calories. But what we know now is that the quality can affect caloric burning. So for example, there was a study, I'm blanking on the university that did this, but where they gave people the same number of calories, but in one instance it was processed foods and the other was whole foods. The people that had the whole foods burned 50% more calories a day. So it's those bioactive compounds. It's the interaction with the gut microbiome. It's the fiber. It's the anti-inflammatory compounds. It's how it affects blood sugar and insulin regulation. All of those things play a role in how our body utilizes those calories. So in some cases, I have private practice clients who come in and they're eating too little calories. And when I increase their caloric intake, but it's all quality calories, they start losing weight again, or their gut health gets back on track. Sometimes I meet people that, they're not, they go to the bathroom like once every 4 or 5 days, right? And then they start eating whole foods, high fiber, nutrient rich. And now it's like every day, like clockwork. And that is so, transformative, right, to your health when you have good bowel regularity and you sleep better and your energy is more even and your appetite is more regulated. It's not, you don't have these highs and lows and dips and valleys. It's transformative to your mental and physical health and even how you interact with other people and again, productivity, all of those things. So the quality of what we eat is really truly the most important factor.
That is super helpful. Are there any diet trends that you would like to bust? Are there any of them that are just like, under your skin right now that you're just like, oh, I just wanted to tell people about that. It's not cool. It's not true. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the one that I think is the most ridiculous is the carnivore diet. I mean, I can't even
explain what it is, because it's so unbelievable in my head.
It is
anyone could survive.
It is zero plant foods. So it is literally only eating animal foods, and that is all. And I can't even understand how any healthcare professional could even entertain the idea that this would be at all beneficial for health. I mean, and it's few sort of high profile people have also promoted this. Mm-hmm. And that's probably the one that gets under my skin the most, because it's what I've seen over the years that I've been in practice is that, everything goes to an extreme, right? So when I first started out, low fat was trending. And so people would try to go to zero fat. And I would have people I remember having, when I first started out, I would work with a lot of marathon runners and triathletes, and they would come in and they would have very dry, cracked skin, say, oh, no matter how much lotion I put on my skin, it won't heal. And their hair is thinning and they're not getting their periods. And because they're eating zero fat diet, and they would eat, a giant white bagel with jam because it was fat free, thinking that this was healthy because it had gone to that extreme of zero fat is the most optimal, which was never what, dietitians and nutritionists were recommending. And then when it switched over to protein, then it became, over the years, it's become more and more and more and more protein. So it went from paleo, still included, like you mentioned, Alexandra, it didn't include beans or whole grains, but it still allowed some plant foods, right? Certain types of fruits and lots of vegetables even sweet potatoes were allowed. But then it just kept getting more and more extreme to where the carnivore, I think, is almost like the fat-free. It's like the most extreme that you could go, pushed all the way to the limit of zero plant foods. That is ridiculous. So, but what we have seen, fortunately, is some research, because I think research is very, very helpful in terms of being able to understand the complexities of how a diet impacts the body. Because we can always try to understand in theory based on how we know, again, the gut and the brain, or the nervous system or the immune system interact. But what we actually saw is that when people had even just a paleo diet, which was not even to this extreme of the carnivore diet, it did produce more pro-inflammatory compounds in the gut. And then those get released into the body and then increase the risk of all these other chronic diseases. And in addition to impacting just short-term health, they just have a snowball effect of leading to long-term damage.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people know, especially after listening to this show, what they should do. But can you give them 3 tips if they want to make a lifestyle change, how they can start? Just 3 tips to walk away from this show with.
Yeah, I think the number one for me is, how do you want to feel? we all know how we feel when we eat well and we don't eat well. And if you're really prioritizing energy and wellness, and, I ask people like, what are some goals that have nothing to do with weight or even performance or body composition that you value? So sometimes people will say, oh, like for me personally, like when I visited Japan, I saw these really old people out doing Tai Chi in the early morning when I would go out for a walk. And I would just think like, I want to do that. Like, I want to be like 95 years old out there doing Tai Chi. I want to have that like independence and ability to be active well into, advanced age if I'm lucky enough to live that long. So I think that's one. I think the other thing is to start somewhere, right? It could just be with vegetables. Like a lot of my clients, I'll say, just start with the 7 servings of vegetables a day and make that the first thing that you focus on. Do it in a very specific way. Like maybe you try for your 2 cups of fruit, you try to get 1 in at breakfast and 1 as part of a daily snack. For the vegetables, get 1 in at breakfast, maybe blend it in a smoothie with that fruit, 2 at lunch and 2 at dinner. Boom, there's your 7. If you're following that strategy, you can consistently do this to the point where now it feels like second nature and you go, oh, okay, this is just my new normal now. This is just how I eat. I eat 7 servings of produce a day, and then focus on another thing. Maybe it's eating more plant-based proteins, or maybe it's switching over to more healthful fats or drinking more water or whatever it is, and kind of make it a step ladder approach, right? And then the other thing I think is really important is to have some sort of support, because a lot of people, unfortunately, that I encounter, they have a not only a lack of support, but they also have people who try to convince them not to, to kind of like undo these healthy goals. Oh, you don't need to do that. Or maybe their partner, they want them to be a partner in crime and, order the pepperoni pizza with them or eat the pint of ice cream with them or something like that. And, so even if that social support is, another family member or a friend or someone in some sort of, online group or, something, just a group of people that are like-minded, that have similar goals, that you can get that sort of, communication and connection with, to help you really stay be empowered, So, I mean, there's, of course, a lot more to it, but I think those are good places to start.
So many pathways to success right there. I mean, yeah. Thanks for asking that question. You're good at like, give me the nitty gritty. Give me the 1, 2, 3.
Our audience just wants to transform. That's why they listen to us. So there's areas they want to transform. And you've helped so much, Cynthia, with all the amazing information that you have. So thank you so much for being on the show. Where can people find you if they want to work with you?
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so great. I mean, it just went by so fast because you guys are so easy to talk to. So my website is just my name, cynthiasass.com. And then I'm also on Instagram. Unfortunately, my full name was taken. So it's Cyn, C-Y-N, which is one of my nicknames, _Sass on Instagram. And I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. But I love interacting with people on Instagram or through social media. But of course, you can also reach out to me through my website. So if whether if someone wants to work one-on-one, I do virtual coaching, long distance via phone or video coaching. But it also just if someone has, questions or is confused about something, sometimes I can direct them to a helpful resource. So if they just want to reach out for that reason, that's great too.
Thank you
Amazing.
so much.
And Cynthia's on the Switch for Good website too. If you go to experts,
that's right.
And you can find her that way too. If you're used to going to our site, she's right there. It takes you right to her on her website. So, wow. Yes. Well, write another book. Do that, please, because we need more out there of your goodness and all of your amazing tips and education and knowledge. And we'll have to have you back. This was incredible.
Thank you so much. You guys stay safe.
Okay, you too.
Take care. Stay healthy.
All right. Mwah. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.